know are fundamentally conceptual. Like human reality is an idea. Good evening, everybody. I want to talk today about the ego. And the ego, in my definition, oh my gosh, sorry about this. Just moving this over here. I consider the ego to be the foundational pathology for all human pathology. That every single mental health disorder has its origins with the same neurological phenomenon. That there's a being state that all people have that they will live their entire life within, unaware that it constitutes a very small fraction of the total sum of consciousness available. That for thousands of years, we've had this mystical, spiritual world of enlightenment. And in these teachings, people experience something dramatic changing about the way that they experience reality. The primary problem with these experiences is that they're not transferable through any description. And the philosophical understandings that correlate to these experiences are really just meant to point people in their direction. However, the ego is unable to really approximate the meanings of these experiences simply because it's outside the boundaries of what the ego can create. And what I would liken it to is, on a neurological level, enlightenment is removing something that you are unaware is there. Imagine that for the entire duration of your adult life, you were paralyzed neurologically, yet unaware of it. That the ego is essentially a neurological stroke. That the segregation of the consciousness into two spaces, the subconscious and then what you experience as the wakeful experience, is a neurological phenomenon. And it's conducted by the sympathetic nervous system. That essentially the ego is a state of pervasive subjective awareness that is contaminated by powerful emotions. And so people form very rigid attachments to the architecture of their reality, their beliefs. And so the ego is a structure that propagates its own necessity, because the ego creates a world that you're always guided by fear, that mandates that you be a particular way as a response to the way reality shows up. Oh gosh. And so that's the ego's world. The experiential world of hell is a world where a human being is compelled to ongoingly try to fix their identity. That the identity of a human being is a yo-yo. One moment you're feeling good enough, the next you're not. And when you get triggered into these states, you become the embodiment of that emotional experience. Your posture changes. Have you noticed that when you're triggered into feeling not good enough, you become super avoidant? That when you're in that state, you lose your confidence. Notice how fear affects you. Have you noticed that anxiety has a profound effect on your thought process? Have you noticed that anxiety seems to impact your ability to understand or study? Have you noticed that the more anxiety or the more serious or the more, important something is to you, that it actually has a profound effect on your ability to perform? How does anxiety affect your ability to public speak? How does it affect your test taking? How about your studying? Have you noticed that there is a cognitive effect of anxiety? Have you noticed when you're ruminating? Like when you're super triggered, that's when you're most analytical. You see, analyzing is actually resultant from dissociation. That the subjective need to analyze and understand is compensating for a lack of awareness. That the neurological impairment invoked by fear dissociates the person from having awareness of their environment. Normal emotions are suppressed and subordinated, and so they're not there to accurately contextualize reality. That's the very basis of Darvo, narcissistic abuse, betrayal, guilt tripping, is evoking reactions that are completely unrelated to reality. But you see, the problem with the ego is that the emotional states that ego creates actually cause the manifestation of the circumstances associated with the emotion. The fear of rejection causes rejection. That there would be no rejection without the fear of rejection, because you would not actually experience the reaction of rejection, and so you wouldn't interpret anything as a rejection. Second, you wouldn't be afraid of the rejection, so you wouldn't have the contamination of anxiety. You see, the fear of rejection has you assessing your own emotional experience to determine your own security. And so you become totally inauthentic. You check out and you start analyzing the other person and trying to be nice, trying to be whatever you think you need to be in the avoidance of rejection. And so the projected fear of rejection creates anxiety towards the reaction that hasn't even happened, the equivalent of approaching a bear cave. And how does that affect the outcome? You see, when you attach to an outcome, you see the fear of rejection mandates the genesis of an anti rejection, which means a phone number or some kind of arbitrary outcome to be symbolic of safety. But you see, that becomes the context of the relationship after that. That the person fearing rejection and abandonment is going to try to maintain the relationship in avoidance of abandonment. And so they only experience the emotions associated with being safe from abandonment or abandonment. And that becomes the contextual relationship to that other person. And so that person becomes just a surrogate for the avoidance of rejection and abandonment, an arbitrary projection, fear of failure. And so you see, the ego propagates its necessity by conjuring ways of being like nice, like funny. You see, you can improve your behavior, your looks, your body, your financial status in the avoidance of rejection and become very, very good at it. But you see, it's for the validation of the achievement of anti rejection that makes you feel good about yourself. Because the risk and the challenge of overcoming potential rejection validates the ego's need to become good enough. And so that becomes it. You see, when you're successful in the avoidance of failure, whatever way that you are to be successful is valid and justifies the anxiety of 6 months of working. You see people that tell their family, like, daddy's got to work, I'm, like not there for the family because they're trying to be good enough for the family and they miss out on, raising their children. And so the sacrifice of ego is this someday future happiness. But you see, when you operate with the fear of failure as a motivational device for success, you see success is just anti failure. And the fear of failure is approached like an animal predator, a fight or flight based potential reaction to be avoided. And so your triggers are the architecture of ego, projected emotions that to be avoided through aspiring or avoidance. And look at somebody who feels abandoned. Well, the abandoned person fears abandonment, so they stay in the relationship. They stay in the relationship to avoid abandonment. And so being devalued triggers them to stay in the relationship. And then they get discarded. And they're like, it was my trust that was the problem. So the trust is the problem now. And so now they avoid abandonment by avoiding relationships. And so they live in this duality, thinking that trust and not trust is the problem. No, your fear of abandonment is the problem. Because when you fear abandonment, you're looking for signs of security, AKA love bombing. Oh, you got dumped, and now you need the person to really show that they care about you. And so you need arbitrary validation. You need to be convinced that this is safe, And so somebody's attachment to you, somebody's proactivity, all the things that might be considered anomalous in a normal context. You see, when you go through life as an ego, the ego is only preoccupied with fixing its own emotional experiences, that it promotes the fear of all these reactions. The ego is trying to securitize its own identity on a hierarchy, a comfort zone. See, the ego is not just about being the best, the ego is just good enough. It's whatever it is. You see, someone's ego might just be, you know what? I don't want all that stress and hard work. I just want enough. So that person would sacrifice whatever ambitions to avoid those extra demands and anxieties that would compel their fear of failure. And so they'll just have an adequate, good enough life. And so they'll be in a comfort zone where what they do might not be good enough, but it's okay. And so it's sort of like they find their position. And so the ego is really just a hierarchical beingness that's just trying to find its place, and it forms rigid architecture around its own self assessment, its own potential, its own abilities. And it needs to do that in the avoidance of failure. It has all these traits. I'm not good at this, but I'm okay at that. It doesn't recognize and account for the anxiety is the only reason why you're not that good at that. You see, anxiety, fear, confusion is not a cognitive experience. You see, fear and confusion is dissociative. And so your intelligence and cognitive ability is impaired by fear. Because fear is not an emotion, fear is a neurological subordination of emotions. Because fear comes from fight or flight, which invokes tunnel vision. And so everything that you're attached to, trying to fix and change in your life, all the things that are swimming in your mind at all times, from bills to things you got to do, the ego forces you to live in a giant gopher game where you're just trying to get rid of all the not good enoughs and the stress, and you're either avoiding, procrastinating, or attacking. That's it. Not good enough. That's the animal fight or flight runaway response. Not good enough is the proportional assessment of risk that causes avoidance for animals. And that's why you go through periods of trying to figure it out and make it happen. And then when you have some failure, you go into not good enough. And then not good enough causes you to avoid. And you see, what would happen to you if you didn't have any of those fears, though? What would happen to your mind without confusion, without the fear of failure or rejection? Without the fear of rejection, you never get rejected, because rejection is just an interpretation based on this emotional dynamic that you projected. And so if you approach somebody with no fear of rejection and no attachment, then you'd be charismatic, engaging. You'd actually be interested in the person rather than just the avoidance of rejection. But you see, the life lived in ego lives life experiencing life contextualized by its own identity, because these emotions are stuck positive feedback loops that become the basis of the person's experience of self. And so when you feel not good enough, it's a neurological loop that mandates you fix it with some external thing. And you have an attachment to whatever it is that caused it, whether it's a person, whether it's a quiz, whether it's a result at work. And so you become the embodiment of not good enough. You take on the architecture and posture. You walk that way. You don't want people to ask how you're doing until you feel good enough and can report something. Because if you told them, everything you say is contextualized by that emotional state of not good enough, and then you're going to want to fake it or ice it over or not acknowledge those negative feelings or just be avoidant of people seeing you this way. So, that's the world of ego. The world of ego is just the sense of self. It's a small compartment within the expanse of the mind. And ever since you were a child, you've been stuck in one giant vicious circle where you were trying to be perfect for mom and dad. And mom and dad were scary, and you never feel like you quite were good enough. In fact, if you look, you have this notion that you need to be perfect, and you can't. And so there's a resignation to your life that money isn't going to really do it. You know that you can't really be perfect, but you don't know what else to do. that that's all your life is about. Your life is only about proving yourself or being comfortable. Now, you can say anything you want, but on an emotional, experiential level, look at all your goals, look at everything you strive for, look at the anxiety of it, and look at how many of the things that you've done were never necessarily an authentic, passionate pursuit of things that really matter to you, but were really something you conceived of in its utility for your aspirations of proving yourself or making the whatever money you thought you need to make or whatever it was that you're trying to do. And it's always about a someday where you feel better than today. And then the carrot you're chasing, you keep getting to some goal, and then you get some validation, okay, there's your promotion, great. And then whatever you thought it was going to do to permanently affix you in happiness in your fantasy didn't happen. That it fell apart or it just didn't last. You got that promotion and then you show up on Monday and now the competition is higher. You got that business going and now you've got the burden of all the responsibilities. And so the ego entraps you because you have to maintain the structure in order to preserve your identity. So the ego externalizes you where your sense of value, self-worth, importance is purely circumstantial. That's why when people suffer some financial loss, you know, they fear confronting that or telling their wife. Some people would jump off a building over the nonsense of the ego's identity as attached to material because they intuitively know that everything they get from ego is empty. That, okay, you're rich. And so now you're surrounded by people that love your accomplishments or what you could provide them, or the association with you socially means something to them. But what happens when the money's gone? Everybody takes off. You're not paying for the parties anymore. People will abandon you. They'll just move on. You look at a celebrity falls apart, files bankruptcy. It's like they collapse and then they're bankrupt and then nobody cares anymore. Oh, if they came back, everyone would cheer them on. But people actually dissociate from people who failed because it makes them feel like uncomfortable. People, would shun them. And so the world of ego is this hierarchy that everybody's trying to climb up, a subjective assessment of moving goalposts, like what is success in this inflationary world. And yet you don't know any different. Like that money isn't really the way you should measure yourself. However, you do it anyway, because you've been indoctrinated into that as a consumer. Your clothes, your appearance, your status, your money, you're completely externalized entirely, totally vulnerable to the point of paranoia, to the point of projecting imaginary thoughts into other people, to the point of complete suffocation in terms of your self expression socially. Like you're so afraid of disappointment, so afraid of judgment, so afraid of failure that you're completely avoidant, that your whole life is patternized based on the avoidance of your own projected arbitrary emotions that have never had anything to do with reality. Your fear of failure, your fear of rejection, your fear of abandonment, your fear that you're not enough, your fear of being broken. The notion that there's something wrong with you is just a gateway for your internal rumination for you to locate which trigger to apply in a fight or flight based hierarchical system where you make all your decisions on the basis of the emotional path of least resistance because your decisions are all fight or flight, yes or no, right or wrong, black or white thinking. Someone asks you for help, you go into a state of confused rumination and anxiety because you have to be nice. And so you're kind of like, if I say no, I don't want a conflict. You don't want to feel guilt. So guilt puts a barrier over here. And then over on the other side, you have some emotional consequence. And then you quickly review which is easiest for you emotionally. And because your consciousness reduces into fight or flight, you lose awareness of the total sum of potential possibilities. And so you live in patterns because unbeknownst to you, the decision making apparatus causes all your patterns. You experience consciousness, But your decisions are made based on the weight of reasons and the emotional anticipation of your own reactions or your own reactions to imaginary fear based outcomes. And so your guilt, your fear of conflict, your fear of rejection, your fear of failure is what you live in pervasive of anxiety and avoidance of. And overcoming your fear of failure means you need to succeed. And then that's what's going to give your ego its esteem, its identity. And it's a yo yo. And so one moment you're good enough, next moment you're crushed, and it's circumstantial entirely. And so your identity is completely externalized because the only way you break these vicious circles is with some evidence, and it's temporary, and it's every area of your life that you're dominated by this fear of not being good enough in every single area of life. And you're either resigned or you're actively engaged or you're avoidant. But either way, it's there, and there's no fulfillment or freedom. There's no peace of mind. So, you know, fear is not just an emotion. Fear is a neurological phenomenon. That the more fear a person has, the more dogmatic, the more entitled, the more grandiose, the more ignorant. Because fear dissociates them from awareness. Fear disconnects you from the environmental awareness as well as the emotions that would properly inform you of the circumstances of your own existence. And your emotions, being all trigger based for the most part, cause all your patterns. And it's inescapable, unfulfilling, impossible to do anything within ego to ever overcome that. That ego has no capacity for any kind of transformational learning because the process of understanding and analyzing is dissociating from your own experience. And the inclusion of external knowledge to satiate the curiosities of your ego only add to the compounding of rumination because all the ego is trying to do is bury itself. It's trying to act as if it understands, to give itself the false interpretation of having something to stand upon to pursue the same deluded standard goals. So, see, the ego will always deceive you because the emotions that the ego propagates have no relationship to the reality of your circumstance. It's the same emotion from 5 years of age. Most of the stuff that you're avoiding and feeling have nothing to do with reality whatsoever. But it manifests the circumstances that confirm the validity. Everything you do in ego validates the existence of these underlying notions as true. See, if you're trying to fix feeling not good enough by pushing yourself in business or whatever your goals may be, everything you do validates that you need to do that. And so you make it real. And the anxiety is based on your attached outcome because the outcome is going to dictate your reaction. And so you're afraid of your own reactions. You see, you think you're afraid of failure, you're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of your emotional response to the perception of failure because it will trap you and define you and crush you and collapse your consciousness and render you dysfunctional, cause confusion, rumination, and trying to fix yourself. And it's a yo yo because you think it's real. You actually think you are the failure. You become the failure, you embody it. It's a way of being. That every time you get triggered, you think that's who you are. And every time you get out of it, now that's who you are. That's the real you. And that's the real you. And every time you experience these dynamics, it transforms your recollection of past experiences because it becomes the lens through which you see everything that you projected everywhere in life. That's why getting out of a narcissistic relationship is difficult for someone because they got discarded. Every trigger is totally active. They feel broken, confused, lost, abandoned, small, helpless, powerless, weak. And they think it has something to do with the narcissist. It doesn't. They just trigger you. They just push those dynamics, max them out to get what they want because you're a robot. You're a stimulus response machine. They touch the not good enough, you start trying to earn their validation because you attach in an animal fight or flight reaction pending their approval in avoidance of abandonment. And you're so attached to a fantasy future that fixes you that you avoid the reality to avoid the abandonment, and you choose the not good enough. Because when you go into something's wrong with me, that's the animal fight or flight first phase of inquiry. See, the animal wakes up thinking something's wrong here, and it has to look around its environment to locate the specific predatory threat. And so the animal's fight or flight reactions are real animals. You have an adrenaline reaction to failure. And so your predatory world is not good enough, failure, rejection, something's wrong with me. And so you go into your head to figure out which trigger to activate. You got the something's wrong with me, you're not sure what it is. And so you got to look. And so you're going through your mind trying to figure it out, looking at your past, trying to figure out what's wrong with you. Boom, a not good enough trigger. And then you take on the embodiment of not good enough. And the whole paradigm of ego tries to fix itself. And so the whole book of psychology is defining the something that's wrong with you because you have this notion that there is something wrong. And then you create thoughts to try to contest your own feelings. That's believing in yourself. See, you need to believe, believe, believe to bulldoze your way through the gauntlet of your own projection. Yeah, you're so afraid of the feeling of failure that you need to just boom, 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 overpower it. You gotta be assured that you could do it. And that's the world of motivation. The world of ego is the world of motivating yourself to overcome it because you need the success to stabilize the ego's identity. And so you want to prove yourself. You want to paper mache good enough everywhere. You want to stand in a box. You want to look at your house, your stuff, to embody the ego's necessity. The ego necessitates its own residency by A, giving you the fear, and then giving you the way of being to overcome it, and then it just keeps destroying you because the emotions don't accurately describe reality. Oh, you thought that was a soulmate, right? Well, how come you couldn't see him? Well, you couldn't see him because you don't form normal emotions for the reality of your circumstances. You form not good enough emotions, abandonment emotions, emotions that are inappropriate for an adult. So you just feel small, helpless, confused, not good enough, and you think you need them in order to fix that? You think that that's natural, normal? Is it really true that you got abandoned as an adult? How can an adult get abandoned? Were you nursing? Did they leave you with some diapers? Were you left at the fire department? Did you have a car, cell phone, social networking, flat panel TV, Netflix subscription, any refrigerator? Did you have running water? So where's the abandonment? And what materially did the narcissist give you that meant you were incapable suddenly? Weren't you capable before you met them, but now suddenly you can't move on with your life? You can't live without someone? Well, what is that? Oh, yeah, well, that's just recreating the original moment. The dissociative experience. You see, you dissociated during your first fight or flight. You created the not good enough as just the expression of avoidance. The broken was the paralysis that the child felt because going into their head had no behavior associated with fixing this situation. When the ego was created, it was just a fight or flight reaction. The first one you experienced in childhood caused your confusion and your profound misinterpretation because something happened outside of yourself and you made it about your own brokenness, being not good enough, being small, helpless, powerless. And then you became afraid of your parents, and so you needed to be good enough for them, fantasizing about being perfect someday, and that's it. And so you've been doing that your whole life. And so your whole life is about becoming good enough someday. And that's the world of ego. Ego is a word salad machine. It's a subjective interpretation of entitlement, and it defies reality by trying to tell reality without observing it what it is, because the ego is so trying to just survive in your head. And so it's threatened by anything that questions the merits of its own reality. Why? Because the ego creates a yellow brick road to the future, and the voice in your head's like the Wizard of Oz. You create fantasy futures in your imagination that are perfected, because that's the only way for you to be happy. And so you borrow those fantasy futures of your success, your prosperity, your healing, because you're not good enough right now. And if you confronted right now and you looked at tomorrow, it's more of the same. You're afraid of looking at the past. You're afraid of looking at the predictable, probable future being who you are right now, because right now you already know you're not perfect still. Right now, you have all your little problems that are still out of order. So you're not quite there yet. So you don't like accountability and responsibility. You don't like acknowledgement because you don't want to be accountable. In fact, your ego loves to settle. Your ego loves to learn that this other person's messed up too. Why? Because it relieves the pressure. You just want acceptance. You see, you want acceptance to both remove the responsibility, reduce the likelihood of disappointing someone, and then securing the good enough you need to avoid abandonment. And so rather than wanting someone stable and healthy, because you're not there yet, you're not deserving yet. No, 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 no. See, you don't like acknowledgement because you don't want to be accountable, but you sure do like validation and the opportunity to prove yourself, because that makes sense because you're on this healing journey, remember? You're on this someday trip. You live into a someday future, being proven, being healed, where you have the opportunity and time. So you buy yourself time. And when that someday future collapses, because that's what the ego does, because you attach to people in the avoidance of abandonment, you ignore everything in reality and confusion to allow them to tell you what's going on, and you use your understanding as a way of denying reality. So everything that you understand is a dissociation and disconnect from reality and the avoidance of abandonment. And so you don't want that abandonment. You'd rather be not good enough to fix yourself, to prove yourself, to retain that fantasy. And you'll keep doing that until it blows up in your face. Because unfortunately, reality does not give a shit about your opinions. Reality doesn't care about your beliefs. Reality doesn't care who you're praying to. Reality is one reality. Reality is a three-dimensional universe that exists right now, and it got here however it did. And you do not have the ability to put all the molecules of reality into your imagination and reverse back to the very beginnings of time to entitle yourself to say what reality is. And you entitle yourself anyway. Oh, you judge everybody. You listen to the voice in your head. Agree, disagree. Oh, I agree with that. I don't agree with that. So you're telling that other person you know everything. They're right only if you say so, and you're right all the time. And so the ego is threatened even by new knowledge and new information. It makes it nervous. It solidifies reality to give itself the delusion of having a platform to move forward. And so the ego only makes a realities favorable to itself. Yeah, I mean, if people are going to argue with the referee about what happened, they want the ball back. Of course they're right. Of course your country's right. Of course your political party's right. Of course you're correct. Always. Yeah, and you're very passionate about your righteousness. And so that's how all egos fall. Egos all fall short. Egos can't compare to consciousness because they're disconnected from it. And supplementing a lack of awareness with subjective interpretations custom tailored to the desires of your ego. That you just believe what you want. You get the entitlement of belief. Even your knowledge is that way because you couldn't even originate most of your knowledge. You don't have the creative capacity or the interest or the passion or the development. And so, all these educated people out here, how many people in psychology actually founded the terminology that they memorize? How would they even know the difference? They have no experiential access to their own subconscious. They can't even witness their own organization. And so they just subjectively memorize words and think that that has some power. Memorizing psychology would be like me learning the biomechanics of a major league pitcher. I could study Clayton Kershaw and I could describe the physics of everything about his throwing mechanic. I can study the neurological dimensions of his pitching motion. I can know all the muscles in his body. I can tell you his rotator cuff muscles. Yeah. And so I can do a dissertation on what made him such a great pitcher. And I could take the top 10 Major League Baseball pitchers, analyze them all, do some statistics versus the bottom 10, and then see what I can determine about what segregates them from the people, right? Now, if I was at game 7 watching the World Series, and there they are, Clayton, he's going to close out. One more out required, bases loaded, Dodgers up by 1. His shoulder goes out. Hey, wait a second. There's that baseball expert. Where's he at? Where's Nate? Dr. Nate. Hey, man, you know so much about throwing the baseball. You've got all the knowledge in the world. You got your PhD. We read your dissertation. Amazing work. Can you get us a strikeout? My first pitch would probably go over the fence. And so all the knowledge does nothing for the experience of pitching, nor does the experience of pitching have anything to do with the knowledge. I'll tell Clayton, okay, I'll pitch for you. You go do my final exam. He may not even know one muscle in his body. He may not know any physics, know nothing about his own physiology. He has the experience of being able to throw. You see, in enlightenment, you get the mastery and experience of your mind. In psychology, you get the subjective interpretations created even absent neuroscience. But psychology wasn't a science. So psychology is Western philosophy that grants permanence to the affliction of ego. Psychology only pertains to the subjective experience of people, and they don't recognize that ego is a pathology. That if you took adult human emotions and you imbued those on any animal, they would all die in one generation. The fear of rejection, nobody would reproduce. The fear of failure, they'd go out to try to catch something to eat. Oh, they'd miss the kill. They'd be devastated, humiliated, embarrassed. Oh, the gazelle gets away from a lion. Oh, they'd be traumatized. Why'd this happen to me? Am I not good enough? It might approach the lion. Are you my daddy? You're mean to me. Can I hang out with you and follow you around? My abandonment anxiety just kicked in. You see, animals don't have trauma. You might think they do, they don't. They have a normal fight or flight. If you hurt a dog, it's going to wince when you seize your hand. That's not trauma, that's a normally programmed fight or flight. Human beings, on the other hand, have trauma because they have emotions pertaining to their own self, which are malformations. That the self is an illusion because it's just a paradoxical formation of positive feedback loops due to dissociation into me. You see, me was invented in language, where present moment consciousness was the only thing we were supposed to have. It's the only purpose. The present moment awareness is a navigation for reality, and emotions are what contextualize reality so that we can navigate it accurately. And so animals have emotions catered to the reality of their circumstances to guide their behaviors. And those emotions are on a hierarchy, with fear being the top dog. Yeah, fear certainly trumps hunger. And so it causes tunnel vision, and the animal runs away, unaware of the rest of the environment as to avoid being caused to do other things. You see, animals eat because they're hungry, they mate because they're horny. That's it. They run because they're afraid. The animal doesn't know life or death. The animal does not understand nutrition or protein synthesis. The animal does not even understand mating and having babies. And so the emotions guide the behaviors of the animals. And so without the ability to navigate reality and make decisions about, should I run from the tiger or should I eat? It can't do that because it can't even understand the consequences of each of those actions. And so the animal doesn't run from the lion because it understands that it's going to die, because it doesn't understand that it's alive. It runs because it's afraid. That's it. And so emotions are what provide context to the blank snow cone of reality. Reality is a universe made up of matter. Emotions are the flavors of the snow cone, elements of experience, like flavors or colors. You see, you have a word for the color red, but the word isn't the color. The word is just the sound, the symbol that we chose so that we could communicate about this experiential phenomenon. Salty, it's an element of flavor that doesn't have a replacement in terms of a description because it's a phenomenon broken down to the most, finite experiential paradigm. Colors, flavors, temperature. See, all the senses are how we create an internal universe as a model for the three-dimensional reality. And your consciousness floats around it. Your consciousness is your current observational field of focus. Present moment consciousness rips your attention away from the talking voice in your head that distracts you. And imagine your consciousness is the experience of being alive. And the ego, well, that's the warden in Shawshank Redemption. And so when life is coming to you in the form of visual and auditory stimulus, the ego talks to you about it. So it's intercepting your mail and then it's changing it and then giving it to you. And then you read it and you say, that says I'm not good enough. And then you react. And then you tell somebody that you're saying I'm not good enough. No, you're not listening. I am listening. I heard what you said. And then when you go to talk, the warden intercepts what you're going to say and says, no. That's scary. You don't want to get rejected. No. You don't want to be judged. No. You don't want to fail. And then you obey that. And so you listen to the voice in your head thinking that's you thinking, when the voice in your head is an imaginary creation due to dissociation to embody me. Because when you dissociated into confusion, you created a permanent tunnel vision because you became the threat to yourself. And since me is in the fight or flight reaction, you can't get away from yourself because everywhere you go, you project the potential of rejection, the potential of judgment, the projection of potential failure. Your anxiety is about the potential of your triggers. So you can relate to your triggers, but you avoid the emotional reactions. And so to avoid them, you either create arbitrary goals or symbolic outcomes that would be the antithesis of failure or rejection, or you just avoid, and that's fight or flight. Every decision you make comes into yes or no, right or wrong. That's the tree of knowledge of good and evil. See, good and evil denotes the duality of ego because it reduces the consciousness of the animal to eliminate its awareness for every single behavioral action it could take and only gives it fight or flight and a proportional assessment where I'm not enough makes it run away. And so I'm not enough is what you experienced when you dissociated into yourself and you created a neurological feedback loop by observing I'm not enough as an experience that you thought caused your fight or flight, but it didn't. Everything you observed within yourself was the product of the reaction, also interpreted as the cause. And so the neurological reality of yourself at 4 or 5 years old was captured within the sympathetic nervous system fight or flight because it doesn't contain memories. It contains neurological memories that have no experience associated with them. It's a stupid system that's only designed to bypass the cerebral cortex to replicate the animalistic behavior of fight or flight once it's programmed. Once the rabbit experiences a fox and runs away the first time, every time it sees a fox, it's going to reproduce automatically the same neurological activity but bypass the cerebral cortex by reproducing the neurological output of that experience without thinking. So it reproduces it to avoid mistakes. It's going to see 1,000 foxes. Whatever it did the first time worked. Boom. So it doesn't need to figure it out anymore. And so every single animal that sees, it creates a psychoneurological dynamic for all the predators in its environment. So that's why animals, when taken out of captivity and put back into nature, they don't do well if you took them as a baby because they didn't program their fight or flight system. And so when they hear an owl, they'll hear the wings, but it won't cause a reaction and then it'll get swooped up. And so it needs to be trained in that environment. This enables animals to survive generation after generation with ecosystem changes or survive in different environments and create instinct like behaviors that are catered to the unique environment the animal lives within. And so the fear subordinates the awareness of the animal to shrink the universe the animal lives within to the size of the fox. And so the consciousness of the rabbit shrinks to the size of the fox and it stays in tunnel vision until the fox is gone. That's why people dissociate in a panic and run each other over, is because they lose their awareness. That's the basis of psychopaths, narcissists, is that dissociation to confusion goes all the way to schizophrenia. Because these dissociative disorders are caused by the neurological blockage of reality. And because the imagination formed secondary to the fight or flight mechanism, it has no inhibitions from the neurological effects of norepinephrine. Norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter blocks your awareness. And so it forms a subconscious mind. And in the subconscious mind are all the normal emotions, forming things like borderline personality or CPTSD as you accumulate unexperienced emotions that would accurately characterize your circumstance. You don't feel them because the fight or flight emotions take precedence by neurologically impairing your consciousness. And so you live in a reduced consciousness your whole life where fear and confusion impairs you so severely that you're nearly schizophrenic, that you perform a delusion reality machine. You have such little awareness that you have to manufacture understanding to compensate for the fact that you have no idea what's going on around you. And you think that's normal. No, you have one voice, and that voice in your head is a voice of dissociation and complete mental affliction that you just suffer and suffer and suffer. And they don't realize that's a mental illness. Yeah. Having a voice in your head and you're talking to yourself to figure out reality in a brain that can create the whole universe just by opening its eyes. You live your life like you're a little character, a little abandoned child trying to become good enough someday within the universe, within your mind. And yet you can dream at night, fly around, and when you wake up, you can't even draw a stick figure. Because analyzing has nothing to do with actual awareness, nothing. And you're just walking opinionated, opinion, 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 my opinion, your opinion. Because your opinions form the architecture of your hell. Your yellow brick road is what you defend. That's why human beings are scared of people that change things. That's why they nail the Jesuses or shoot the Martin Luthers, is because people don't like change, even if change is good for them. It threatens their entitled victimhood and brokenness. That your brokenness is your entitlement to avoidance. Yeah, it lowers your expectations and reduces the pressure and gives you the ability to justify your stuckness and resignation. But if you had success, it would be in spite of everything that happened. So it enhanced the need for validation, but also decreased the risk of life. And so that's why you're afraid of letting go of your brokenness. I say let go of your brokenness, you get angry. No, 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 you get uncomfortable. If I say forgive yourself, ooh, you're not sure you can. Oh, you don't want to forgive yourself. Your entitlement to hold all that against yourself, yeah, is your unwillingness to recognize your freedom because you don't want the freedom, because you're afraid of moving forward. You're afraid of the risk of failure. You're afraid of the disappointment. You'd rather just embody a broken person trying to fix themselves to avoid the shame and guilt of your pervasive self sabotage. And so, all your stories and all the knowledge that you use to bury your past is continuing to dissociate you. And so, all the vocabulary, you could just be a Shakespeare of your victim story. You want to write a memoir as if it's going to help other people. It's not. No, because you have no wisdom. All you have is all the nonsense. That's not self awareness. Being able to bury your past with all these explanations and psychobabble and love languages and astrological signs. I mean, look at a modern person today. Pray on Sunday, pharmacy on Monday, therapy on Tuesday, yoga on Wednesday, meditate on Thursday, tarot card Friday, psychic, Saturday. And now you got to go to Costa Rica, maybe meet some spirit guides. Yeah, you're just a meaning making machine. Stimulus response, that's all you are. Stimulus response, meaning making machine. You have not consciously discerned yourself from reality. You have not recognized the vast segregation between an objective world with no meaning and everything you make it mean about yourself. This happens over there, I'm not good enough. That opens over there, I'm a failure. You see, you have not unconflated the artificial meaning of your triggers that contaminate the otherwise meaningless arbitrary reality. Because you're so fundamentally incomplete looking for yourself like Pokemon, trying to find the emotions that are missing. You can't deal with the world without meaning because your ego is only existent in the meaning. You see, your ego is a meaning generator, necessitates its own residency in your mind by generating the fear that mandates that you become a certain way as a response to the fear that it propagates. And everything you do in servitude, not enough. When then you could justify all the anxiety and validate the way of being that you created to perfect the art of overcoming your own fear of being not enough. And then you get the little validation and then you do it again and again and again. And you live into an illusion that there's going to be a day when you have all the material things and you're proven and you've overcome everything. And someday never comes. Never. Because it's got nothing to do with reality. It's just a repetitive dynamic trigger that just keeps activating arbitrarily. And the worst thing that could happen to you as you fantasize about people being more successful than you and thinking that they had it easier would be that you actually achieved something because it wouldn't work. Because you could get to the top like Kanye West and be surrounded by parasites and vampires, knowing that if they took it all from you, then everyone leaves anyway. That if you failed, where'd everybody go? When you've hit rock bottom, where'd all your friends go? Gone. No, nobody wants to associate with the loser. No, 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 that'll affect their ego. Oh, no, 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 no. And people didn't seem to mind you collapsing because their egos were like, well, at least I'm better than that. And so you measure yourself off everyone, everyone measures themselves off you, and you just live in a pervasive hierarchy of defining yourself entirely externally through validation, through material stuff. And no matter what it is that you do, whether you think you're a good person because you do that, it's the same game. The same good enough game. Doesn't matter if you're good enough as money, doesn't matter if good enough is just middle of the road for you and avoiding the responsibility and pressures of being an entrepreneur. If you think it's helping people, when you're helping them, you're trying to be good enough for them. When you're at work, you're trying not to get fired and be abandoned. Yeah, you're always trying to find the needs and then solve it. Just people pleasing, reacting, never feeling quite like you belong, always feeling used, falling down into subjective reality collapses that look like abandonment when your future falls apart and you feel betrayed, and then trying to rebuild yourself, trying to get yourself right back out of that. What's wrong with me? Something's wrong with me. I don't matter. Gosh, I'm not good enough, broken, helpless, confused, powerless, weak. And then do it all over again. Go to the therapist. Oh, yeah, let's go process your trauma. Hmm. Yeah, because your trauma was just the same trigger. No, it didn't come from the trauma. Because you see, if you thought it was the trauma, no, it was the misinterpretation that predated the trauma. Because if somebody hurt you, what does that got to do with you? Okay, so your dad, your mom, they did something bad. But why does that make you not good enough? What does that got to do with you being lovable? What does that have to do with you being broken, confused? Why would that be an abandonment? So look at it. Your traumas, the same trigger. But why don't you look? You see, you think that it's the circumstances, and that's what psychology thinks. You see, you go to the psychologist, they just got dumped by a narcissist. They'll look at that, oh, you got abandoned. Then they're going to look at your past and why you're triggered. Of course, looking through the kaleidoscope of triggers into your past, you're going to find it. Hmm. And then you're going to fixate on reliving that. And as you visualize it in a state of being triggered, you just keep reactivating it, trying to process it, failing to realize that the sympathetic nervous system is just responding to the visualization within the dynamic of the trigger itself. It's got nothing to do with the memory. The memory is just being pulled up as a visualization. And newsflash, you see, the fight or flight reaction has to be within the imagination so you could plan the future. So that if you were thinking about capturing a saber-toothed tiger, you need to not be grandiose. And so you'd have to approach it with caution. So if you're going to simulate realities within the virtual space of your imagination, which is what it was used for, you'd want to do it accurately. And so if you're going to visualize your past or your future, don't you notice how your triggers and fears propagate your view of the future too? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, you become avoidant. You don't like looking at goals of the future. Why? Oh, you don't want to get triggered. Yeah, so that's why you look at the future. You see, you create a fantasy that can't trigger you. And so you put it out there long enough so that you can experientially buy yourself the time for the healing, the fixing, the growing, the bill paying, the get the girl, do all this, blah, 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 blah. And so you create a perfect fantasy future to make it trigger proof. Because as a little boy, little girl, you said, I have to be perfect. Perfect. Well, how's perfect going? Oh, it's not. You got a can't in there too, a subconscious can't. That's right, because when you collapse and the future that you're living into falls apart as the motivational instrument through the hell of your life, that you borrow the hope to motivate yourself to attain what you need so you could be happy by being perfect. Well, when that all falls apart, oh my God, boom. Vicious circle, figure it I can't. The maximization of not good enough, the total avoidance. No, you don't want the reactions. But you see, then all the confusion. That's the problem, is that the confusion such dramatically reduces your consciousness that it propagates your failure, that you can't figure out. You are stuck, so you feel stuck and paralyzed, totally dissociated into the confusion. Now, what are you doing? Ruminating. Yep, because you got to figure out what it is that's wrong with me. Let me go to therapy and talk about it. Rinse and repeat. No, you got your love language, your astrological sign, right? You know it all. You're an expert. You know everything about your trauma. You're a regular trauma expert, victim survivor 101. You just know all the terms. And you know what the terms are good for? Relabeling the same experiential phenomenon in an illusion of control through understanding. Oh, so you don't say my ex boyfriend or girlfriend, you say my ex narcissist. The feelings, now you call that a trauma bond, and you project victimhood onto this imaginary thing. Oh, it's not confusion, it's cognitive dissonance, right? Yeah, you're learning, right? Yeah. So you got cognitive dissonance, trauma bond, what else? The new supply. So you're jealous of the new supply. You call it the new supply. And what did terming the new person as the supply do for you? Nothing. Nothing you learned did anything. Oh, I mean, it was nice to learn that you were a victim, gave you some comfort, wasn't all your fault. But how's that really working for you? My narcissist hoovered me. And so you got all the terms and you just used a label maker with the professional label maker playing crossword puzzles with your childhood. They lose everything they know. They need a desk reference. Okay, hold on here. I'm trying to remember the 9 checklist criterias for this diagnosis. We're going to figure out what's wrong with you, okay? I've got a big Bible here of stigmatizing you with all the what's wrongs. See, we've taken the ego and we've differentiated into every potential grouping. You see, in a society of hundreds of millions of people, we're going to see that people have very similar childhood environments, for where figure it out, be perfect differentiates itself in so many different ways. And so we can group those behavioral dynamics and label them and then talk about them forever. Yeah, it's really interesting. Every single man, woman, and child somehow genetically mutated to get a chemical imbalance. And they're all traumatized by their parents. Daddy wouldn't play t-ball. Mom and dad divorced. Daddy screamed. Somebody slapped me. And you're traumatized. Lions are out there eating animals. Some of them get away. They're not traumatized. Like the fight or flight reaction is a normal thing. Fear is normal. Animals run away from each other. They'll try. They get away. They're okay. You'll see a dog with 3 legs playing frisbee. Oh my God! Look at that poor baby. The dog doesn't know. Your Chihuahua will try to hump your leg, and you'll get it off. It doesn't get rejected. It'll just go to the next person. you know. But look at you, rejected. I don't want to go back out there. I got rejected at Applebee's. You got rejected. Rejected. I feel rejected, mate. I did everything in a total state of anxiety fueled confusion. I had these pre prepared jokes and I was trying to make her laugh the whole night. She said I seemed really nice and her friend came and took her away. She blocked me on Instagram. Yeah, okay, because you put your emotional well being in her hands, and her fear of saying no because of her childhood made her be nice to you, which made you think she led you on. But she was just avoiding your reaction because she could sense it, because you're disconnected and checked out. You're not really listening to her. You're analyzing to try to determine whether you're safe or not, whether you're crashing and burning, or whether she's going to give you the number. Oh my God, I felt so good. I avoided that abandonment, got her number. I felt good enough all night. I'm on cloud nine. It's so amazing when I turn off my triggers that I get an enhancement in my cognitive abilities with my mood elevations. Well, yeah, because fear is a neurological impairment. Tunnel vision around your problems. Every single problem you have is imbued with identifying self significance. If you don't do this, you're going to get reactions and you're dominated by it all the time. And so your whole mind is just filled and cluttered with distractions. And it's just endless because you live in a virtual game of the world built by egos. One giant, casino. And you're willing to run on a treadmill your whole life. Yeah, you want $1 million in debt so you can stand in front of a house with a shiny new car with your woman. She's got all the body modifications she could handle. Link in bio, and there you are. Look at me. Hey, babe, look, there's a foreclosure sign. I knew Jake was a loser. That's it. Total sellout. Yeah, you threw your whole life away for validation. That's all it is. And they'll run you to the ground. Oh, yeah, if you're just going to be a validation seeking consumer, and just turn a blind eye to all the elephants in the rooms and the glaring problems with global warming and, aircraft carriers pulling up to Cuba, they don't care. They'll turn this into Mad Max real quick. I mean, all your eggs in this validation basket, that's the world you live in. Total dissociation, avoidance of reality. Because you're small, you don't want it. You only want what you want. No, no, no. You don't want the trouble. You don't want to know what's going on. You're just on that program of, well, it's none of my business. The diffusion of responsibility, total victimhood. They turned us into children, validation seeking, thumb sucking children that displace the responsibility of the narcissist that you put in charge. And they just bribe you with toys and gadgets, things, planned obsolescence, and get you in debt, make you think that you need more, 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 more. And they maxed it out. They maxed out the American black card of the government, and they maxed out the emotions of people to the point of total social collapse. They created incels and alpha males and links in bios and plastic surgery. Used to be worried about giving Barbie dolls to little girls. Hmm. Now you need to make yourself one with a plastic surgeon. Interesting. Yeah, being sexy was a new thing. They invented that. Yeah, being a man as a provider who would associate his cars and material was an invention. The department store was created for new modern consumerism, maximizing your desire to validate yourself and educating your ego in a state of dissociation to make you think that recalling other people's ideas is the same as thinking. So you became a word salad parrot with dogmatic, hierarchical attachments to the attainment of knowledge, with no ability to create knowledge or visualize it because you're dissociating into analyzing. Where today's psychotherapist could talk to someone for 20 years and do nothing. Yesterday's psychotherapist can make all women smoke overnight by understanding how to walk through their subconscious in one conversation and write about it. His name was A. Brill. His writings to Edward Bernays enabled one single publicity stunt to make all women smoke overnight. That's the effectiveness of real psychology. Today's psychology has no experiential connection because words memorized as knowledge have no carryover to the world of experience that the ego dissociates from. And so you can learn all the terms and not know anything at all. You could just argue with someone, oh, you're a narcissist, oh, you're this, oh, red flag that. But you have no awareness because your reactionary triggers have got nothing to do with the lack of knowledge or knowledge itself. that you could let all of them go and never need to know a single syllable of psychology. If you just know how to talk, anybody could let go of all their triggers and not even need to know a single thing about psychology. Just like throwing a baseball, you don't need to learn anatomy to throw a baseball. You don't need psychology to have enlightenment. And knowing psychology wouldn't produce it because it doesn't even know it's real. It would think it's dissociation because it thinks the ego's actually a real thing. It's not. The ego is a pathological malformation spawned by fight or flight positive feedback loops and a need to constantly externally fix yourself because those emotions are wrong. And there is no cause for any emotions of suffering in nature. There'd be no reason. I studied animal psychology to write my book from the first person experience of animals. I just reality tested it. I needed to consolidate enlightenment, psychology, using neuroscience and physiology and evolutionary biology and human development. And I started to look at the psychology and morphology of children to correlate the emotional states trapped in the sympathetic nervous system to even see where they came from by looking at the behavioral dynamics. And I could see the first person experience of NPD or any of the disorders because I could create it in my imagination. And so I could hold the space of all of those fields of subjects in one visual experience. And so I could put all of them there and reconcile the entire world of psychology and develop an entirely new model for understanding early childhood development, both on a psychological and neurological level. Yeah, easy. That's because of the work I do. You could open your consciousness and it becomes a universe where I don't think an audible voice. I reconcile terabytes. Yeah, I walk through evolution and watch it in my imagination. I look at animal behavior and then discover the relationship between emotion and the contextual relationship to the physical reality and the necessity of it in animals and the pathology of it in humans. Where you're abandoned in anxiety is the neurological recreation of an induced separation anxiety that's now just a neurological loop. The majority of all your reactions came from one moment when you were 5, and that's all your triggers are, is the neurological reality of one moment in your life captured by your consciousness and then stored neurologically to be reproduced in every area of your life. Every single traumatic experience that you've had has the exact same emotional fingerprint of the very first fight or flight reaction, cascading emotional dynamics. Something's wrong with me. Yeah. Broken, alone, abandoned, confused, I don't know. I don't matter, invisible, I don't belong, unworthy, worthless, helpless, powerless, weak, small. Figured out I need to be perfect. Figured I need to be perfect is the universal foundation of personality, aka ego, an automatic reactionary way of being as a response to reality itself. Nice, strong to overcome weak, and that's all you are. You project emotions and then you react to the reality that they create. Because emotions are like the flavors on the snow cone of life. See, present moment consciousness is about the meaninglessness of life, that there is no meaning. It's all made up. But you see, the meaning for you is what life means about you. See, everything means something. It has to. This means that, that means this. The ego needs meaning because the ego is meaning. The ego is the architect of subjective meaning. It's a meaning making monster. And that's all you do is analyze, make this mean that, that mean this mean that. That's just all the chickens gossiping and clucking. What does this mean and that mean and the hierarchy and what did Joey do with that and reality TV? Meaning, 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 meaning. That's it. Meaning making machine. Stimulus response robot. That's it. This happens over there. It's involuntary. That means you're not good enough. Boom. Got to fix it. Yeah, you just walk around, meaning make a machine. All you do is make meaning. You see, if you could actually consciously recognize one thing, that life is empty and meaningless, and it's empty and meaningless, that it's empty and meaningless, that there is no meaning out there. That's life. Life is just going. Life is life. There's just a happening. There's just things going on. And then you make it mean something. And it's the meaning that impacts you. The meaning is the impact. But it doesn't mean that. That happened over there. It didn't mean anything about you. It just happened. Your past, what your parents did, what they said, it's what they did. It's what they said. It happened, yes. And you reacted the way you did. But what does it mean about you? Nothing. You didn't get what you wanted? What does that mean? Nothing. She said no. Well, what does that mean? She said no. You see, if you could just have a one-to-one relationship with reality, you'd be enlightened. There's no meaning. That doesn't mean failure. Doesn't mean anything. You wanted 10, you got 8. What does that mean? That you got 8. They said that over there. What does it mean? They said that over there. What does it mean about you? Nothing. Doesn't mean anything. Just listen to it. Okay. Yeah. Makes sense. What's wrong? You feel that? Okay. All right. What does it mean about me? Nothing. There is no meaning about me. There's no me. There's the experience of life. That's it. I don't need to be anything or become. I just exist. I just am. I get to be the beingness of making a difference. Because when you let go of the meaning, you just get that life is empty and meaningless. You enter into a state of being called everything nothing. Without all the meaning, you exit fight or flight. And then suddenly your mind sees the infinite ways of being, and you have what's called choice. Choice only emerges in consciousness because you don't have choice, you have decisions. See, decisions are made where the responsibility is placed on the weight of the reasons. See, the weight of the reasons makes all your decisions, has all your power. If I ask you, why did you do that? You'd say, because of this. Yeah. And so, because of this has the power, not you. You don't make choices, the decisions are made for you. Yeah. Like the emotional weight. So, you don't have freedom. No, because you diffuse the power and responsibility of choice into decisions, where the weight of the reasons, the emotional significance, puts profound boundaries, and you just live in vicious circles, repeating the same exact reactions. And your consciousness collapses into fight or flight, yes or no, good or bad, right or wrong. And that's it. You're just a meaning making machine, judging, evaluating, assessing, avoiding, just chattering in your head. And you're listening to a voice in your head and you think that's you. You actually think that you're the voice in your head. And you may be so unaware that you just heard the voice say, what voice? And you're not even noticing that that is a voice in your head. See, you're not the voice, you're the one listening to it. That your consciousness is just the observer of reality, but you're not in reality. See, your brain created this perfect reality for you to just move around in with your consciousness. You see, you can be at the Grand Canyon and take it all in. Or you could be looking at a pine cone or reading something. Or listen over there, listen over there. You have 2 eyes and 2 ears to enable the creation of a three-dimensional reality within your mind. A perfect rendition. So seamless you think it's out there. This is not a metaphysical conversation, it's a literal. You're not in reality. You're in your head exclusively. You have eyes. Yeah, those are sensors. So you're absorbing electromagnetic radiation and transmitting it through an optic nerve, converting it to action potentials, electricity, and then processing it and generating a three-dimensional universe. That's how much significant brain power you have. And so you're like a child who programmed an avatar in God's supercomputer. That's your Adam and Eve moment. See, your original sin was your blasphemy. Something's wrong with me. I'm broken. That's the God creating hell. Your consciousness created the devil and hell. Hell is the inescapable reactionary world of ego. The Tower of Babel is you crawling and clawing your way up. And it always falls short, because ego would always fall short of the glory of consciousness, aka God. Well, why? Because the ego isn't in reality. The ego's in a subjective, opinionated, entitled reality that people will try to destroy each other in preservation of their own yellow brick road to a someday future that they need to be true, because that's the only thing that would make sense to the ego. It needs to make sense of all this meaningless suffering. It needs it to mean something, because it couldn't understand just endless suffering for no reason, running in circles, chasing its own tail, avoiding love while chasing validation, and avoiding accountability and responsibility out of fear of disappointment. Gosh, that disappointment is so hard, isn't it? How much do you fear disappointment? You fear disappointment like a lion approaching you, like it's next to dying. Why would it be? Well, because it's in the fight or flight reaction. The fight or flight reaction is made for lions, tigers, and bears and rattlesnakes. But look at you. Your fight or flight reactions, David and Melissa, and just them thinking about you. Gosh, you're scared of girls and boys and people, and everybody's like you. Everybody's walking around. Where are the good people at? I'm scared, and everybody's scared of everybody, and you fail to see that everybody's scared of you. Everyone's like, society this, society that. It's like nobody likes traffic, but nobody acknowledges that they're part of it. I'm at Starbucks and I see like a person complaining. And I walk up to him and I'm like, "Excuse me, sir, how are you? Seems like you're pretty upset." Look how long it's like, I know it's taking a long time, but have you taken a look? There's a very long line outside, and you came at a particular time where it's very busy. But let me show you something. You see back there? They're moving at a very high rate of velocity. So the production of the coffee is maxed out. It's just that it doesn't take as much time to order a coffee as it does to prepare it. But there is something you can do to make a difference right now. Do you want to know what that would be? What would it be? It's like, cancel your order. Yeah, it'll improve the service for everyone else. Or just, stop reading Melissa the Riot Act, because nobody's back there jerking off. Just take a look. So, life is empty and meaningless. And it's empty and meaningless that it's empty and meaningless. It doesn't mean anything about you. Nothing means anything about you. It just is. You let it go. I give up the right to have the complaint that I'm not good enough in my life forever. See if you could even say that. You'll be scared. Your ego is a scared little child. It only knows its residency in your mind. It doesn't want to let you go. It doesn't want your consciousness to come back and take you back over. And you don't either, because you're scared. See, you don't even know what it would be like. You couldn't imagine it. You couldn't imagine knowing everything. You couldn't imagine your subconscious showing you every moment in your life. You couldn't imagine reliving your life in minutes, seconds, reconciling everything, and never even having another moment of this not good enough. No more confusion, no more broken, no more not good enough. Gone. Doesn't exist. It's not true. I will warn you, you will become an alien. The total sum of consciousness within your mind is so high that it will feel like your brain works at about a billionfold faster than you could imagine. Because rather than talking like an idiot voice in your head that just repeats the same broken record bullshit, all the time you spend ruminating over the last few months is probably the same amount of time it took for someone to create the entire field of calculus. Yeah. You have a brain that's been used to imagine DNA, the structure of atoms without being able to see them, physics, like And if you can't explain how a cigarette lighter makes a flame, that's because you're not even accessing your brain. Like your ego is a grain of sand within your universe. It's the dissociated experience of a 5-year-old. You function at the level of a 5-year-old because you're reproducing the neurological activity of a 5-year-old. Yet your brain developed and it acquired awareness of everything you've been through. It has every single emotion appropriate for every single situation you've ever experienced. The level of empathy within the human mind is nearly supernatural. Your mind is able to create the entire world of another person within itself and accurately relate to their experience and never see them as a fixed thing again. I don't see what you see. I see the world of others when they talk. There's no right or wrong, there's no good or bad. I know everything about their experience. I could walk them into another universe just talking to them. I can create an enlightenment experience in 20 minutes with any human being on the planet. I can disappear like a magician every single trigger in their mind to the point of having their mind become entirely silent for the first time in their life and having their whole subconscious appear to them. And the very first time they get devalued, they would have a revelation that would span the entire duration of that relationship, revealing every single time that happened. And they would have no confusion about the nature of these people around them anymore. And they would be completely immune to narcissists. In fact, terrified of you because you would look through them like a psychic. You would notice they don't have emotions for the vast majority of their behaviors. They would look like a hamster in a wheel in front of you, and they'd become avoidant. But you might not want that. You might not want to see everything, because if you get taken out of the matrix of the ego, you won't be able to go back. The fall would be very painful. So you'd have to think about whether that you just want to sleepwalk the rest of your life with the rest of the time you have, or if you want to wake up. But it's not for everybody. Most people don't have the courage for that, and I don't blame them. Couldn't, you know? I understand the way the ego works. The ego is an entitlement to brokenness. The ego is an entitlement to define reality. The ego is a defiler. The ego is defiant, entitled, self righteous, and it gets to say what's true. And it has no experiential power. All it can do is compare, analyze, and it has no ability to see. The ego is completely blind because the mind is shut down. See, when they talk about your third eye, they're talking about when your consciousness comes back and the amount of mind power you have when you dream, you have when you're awake. Like you see. When I say see, when people talk, I see what they say. When I say see, I see, visually see. And so when you see the experience and you experience it, and when you have no emotions of self, there aren't any emotions of self. They don't exist. Emotions were only for the contextualization of the external world to form a relationship to it. Sadness because this happened. Joy because of that. Not broken. Not sad because I'm abandoned. No, no. That's the illusion of ego. Ego generated the first human experience, or animal experience even, of emotions that defined the ego's relationship to the ego. The ego feels it's not good enough. The ego feels that it's broken. And it projects that onto reality. And it has you think that it's real. Like you actually think that your emotions come from a three-dimensional universe. No, Your ego generates them and packages them interwoven into the three-dimensional reality, and you think it's real because that's what emotions are for. Emotions are for contextualizing reality to inform the animal so it can have the best chances of surviving. But what are your chances? You're just fearful all the time, anxious, stressed, walking around. You're not supposed to have stress hormones unless you're fighting or running. Adrenaline's not made for math homework or job interviews or first dates. No, that's why people get all these diseases. Heart disease, high blood pressure. High blood pressure is caused by the adrenaline. It increases the contractility of the heart, causing sarcoplasmic reticulum to release calcium ions, increasing the stroke volume. It constricts a smooth muscle around all the little arterioles to increase the peripheral resistance to blood flow. It's what causes the butterflies. You get ulcers because the stress is causing the constriction of the blood vessels in the integument. And so when the stomach blood flow slows down, it gets less oxygen, which means that the reproductive rate of the cells that form the lining of the stomach reduces. And so the acid can erode it quicker, causing ulcers. Yeah? Blood pressure, well, the peripheral resistance to blood flow causes an increase in diastolic and systolic pressure. So the heart beats harder, ejecting more blood because it's preparing the body for exercise. You see, what releases the blood pressure is localized vasodilation during running. That's to deliver oxygen to the working muscles. And so your body has a way of prioritizing the oxygen delivery throughout the system. And so adrenaline was only made to prepare the body for work, but without the exercise, the blood pressure just elevates because there's no physical exertion. It wasn't meant, for stressing you out at work, because there's no point. Adrenaline goes through your system to prepare your body for exercise. I studied that. And that's how I understood how to connect the dots and figure out what was going on with spiritual awakenings, enlightenment. Well, meditative enlightenment caused by the parasympathetic nervous system and deep relaxation. So if you could relax deep enough, the parasympathetic, that's part of sleeping, would turn off the fight or flight system. And then suddenly all the cognitive impairments that segregate the consciousness into two domains are eliminated. And the person feels a universe open in their mind. A universe. I mean, the inner space of the imagination is huge. So massive. That's why when people take these ayahuasca drugs, they think they're going to another universe. No, there's a universe already there. 250 billion brain cells with enough connectivity to probably make as many neural networks as there are stars in the universe. Like it reproduces a universe just by looking at it. That much cognitive power, enough cognitive power to learn how to fly and to make fighter jets and Formula One cars. That the processing power of the brain exceeds the human's ability to run. Wasn't enough. We can go to outer space or go underwater. We had to extend our body to even start to approximate the computing power of the human brain. And so the human brain can process reality, 4 lateral G's, people racing cars with open wheels, and in milliseconds trying to pass each other. And you are still trying to figure out your boyfriend at the speed of a talking voice. See, if you think your brain and imagination works at the talking voice pace as you try to anxiously figure it out, you're disabled, because that's not true. I made a supercharger in 5 minutes in my head with physics. I mean, I'm just telling you that the imagination is something out of this world. They call it the third eye. It's not a pineal gland. No, it's just the imagination. That's all I can tell you. But when you're free of fear, see, your imagination right now is like the IMAX theater of your suffering. You just use it to look for what's wrong with yourself. You see, your imagination is like God's Google universe, but you're zoomed on your house. So you're just looking at your house complaining, the shingles. God, why'd you give me such a shitty house? And then what we do when I do these exercises is I'll take a look at your bullshit trauma. I don't even want to hear about the event. I'm gonna write down all the emotions. You're gonna be there, telling me them. Then I'm gonna ask you questions like, okay, so this feeling of not good enough, where else is it in your life right now? And every time I ask you those questions, I force an expansion of your consciousness. Why? Because you're fixated on your problems, you're fixated on you. And we start to go into your memories and we just look for the emotions and you start to see them everywhere. It starts to depersonalize these traumatic experiences. And you start to see that when you're zoomed in on the shingles of your house and we zoom out, you'll notice the whole neighborhood's the same. And then you go back in time and you've been reliving Groundhog Day, the same emotional paradox over and over and over. And this opens your mind so far that you just tell me the first memory that you have. It just pops up. No therapy, no hypno bullshit. We depersonalize all your trauma by just going right past it. We don't even need to look at it. It's irrelevant. Your list of triggers is identical to every person I've ever talked to. I mean, it's just like your tongue makes the same flavors, your eyes see the same colors. The emotions that you could experience are universal for all human brains. And so when this system activated, it did the same thing for all people. All people went, something's wrong with me, and created the ego as a malformation as a result of spoken language. The human brain evolved for millions of years with no spoken words. It didn't evolve away this reaction on a psychological level because it happened so fast that the technology of words just proliferated. In my view, it's likely we had such advanced intellectual power for a very long time. And then when we started using words, it just developed like quickly. Just like you see technology today going real fast, words just developed and, you know, it just happened. But there was a psychological side effect. And the side effect was the entrapment of these neurological phenomenon, positive feedback loops, where the afferent and efferent signals of the sympathetic nervous system's innervation of the cerebral cortex and brain matched each other, where what the child thought was wrong with it was what it observed as the result of the reaction. So the observed result of being triggered by some arbitrary experience outside of the child thought that the emotions felt in that moment of dissociation explained what's wrong with me. So when the child thought, what's wrong with me in a fight or flight reaction, it programmed its own emotional experiences into objects, experientially the equivalent of predatory threats to the child, where its own not good enough was seen like a lion, tiger, or bear. And the parents that walked into the visual field of this experience were captured as fight or flight predators as well. The child became afraid of the disapproval of the parents in avoidance of experiential abandonment that never really happened. And from that moment forward, it would always misinterpret reality. Parents divorced, I felt abandoned and not good enough. Now you're mad at your dad or mommy. Still don't feel good enough for either of them. I'm sure you don't because you can't get over it. You see, you actually think that this feeling is your parents' fault. Yeah, it's not. It's not because they traumatized you, it's inevitable. Not good enough happens to every single person. There's not one human being who escaped this. Doesn't matter if your parents were the best parents or narcissists. Every single human being has the same I'm not good enough. If they have an ego, and that's all it is. Every single human being, regardless of their social status, has the same exact malformation. The only thing that distinguishes their behavioral dynamics is the environment in which they adapted the I have to be perfect. I have to be perfect for successful, well established parents looks like good grades, looks like being adapted for reality. I have to figure it out to be perfect for narcissistic parents looks like hypervigilance, looks like higher levels of internalized guilt, aversions to saying no for being punished, for being a normal child with normal emotions, more pervasive notions of brokenness. But the reactions are the same. So everybody has them, but the manner in which you develop the structure of your personality moving forward differentiates into different mental health diagnoses as well as just behavioral dynamics like people pleasing. But people pleasing is, I would call it pre borderline because it requires more idealization. You see, a people pleaser has the basic architecture of a borderline personality because you see the good in people. You see, seeing the good in people is idealizing them. You look for the good and you try to convince them it's there. Yeah, you see the good in people, idealization. And you analyze to preserve the idealization. When that good person does something that doesn't align with your fantasy, you need to understand it. And then it's usually your fault, and you're good with that. Yeah. And then you believe people can change. Your understanding is everybody's get out of jail free card. And so your cognitive dissonance is A, seeing the good in people, believing people can change, not wanting to judge them, and thinking you're understanding. When understanding is the very mechanism of dissociating and preserving your idealization. You see, being not good enough preserves the idealization because you can't change a narcissist, you can change yourself. And that's what you learned as a child, is that you would have to accommodate narcissists by transforming your subjective reality into theirs, by allowing them to dictate it to you, because that's all you could do. And you had to be nice. And see, being nice is something you're afraid of not being. So you think saying no is mean. So you'd actually think that you're being mean by not doing what somebody wants for you. And so the people pleaser becomes more, of a hypervigilant validation seeker that's addicted to the needs of other people as a way to securitize their avoidance of abandonment in a transaction that's supply for validation. And so your avoidance of abandonment causes you to stay in relationships that you shouldn't. And you use your analyzing to continue to dissociate yourself in avoidance of abandonment all the way until you're completely destroyed. And then you're like, what happened? I got betrayed. Hmm. Yeah. And you think you need knowledge. Knowledge for what? You were right there. You watched it. What do you need to know? Well, I mean, everything that happened in your life, you were right there. And what'd you do with it? Oh, you just dissociated into confusion. I'm confused. What did I do wrong? What did you do? That's all it is. That's the mechanism. So that's your pattern. It's the same underlying thing. And you see, it looks like CPTSD at the end of a discard because of all the unexperienced emotions. You start kind of splitting. You become reactive because you've accumulated so much bullshit. You start arguing with yourself in your mind. The people pleaser will become like, I'm going to put my foot down, say no. Like a people pleaser saying no is like a vigilante act for them. You don't like saying no. No is like a very, very painful word for you. You probably avoid like the Girl Scout cookie girls. Don't look at me. No, no, no. You try to walk because if they ask you, you're gonna be like, oh God. You don't want to hurt their feelings and say no. Oh God, what are you gonna do if you go to the store and there's the Girl Scout cookie girls and then the Salvation Army people? You might need to get like a Barney outfit. Just go incognito or learn how to walk through the back. You probably have a bunch of Girl Scout cookies you don't like. You probably don't like the Thin Mint ones, do you? No. Saying no is not easy for you. because you're conflict avoidant. And see, you like to believe it's altruistic, like you're a good person. You are a good person, but you don't have a choice. But the truth of the matter is you avoid accountability. You see, you're not perfect yet. So you don't like the pressure of acknowledgement. No, 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 no. You don't want expectations because you could disappoint people. And so the people pleasers generally are avoidant of any responsibility. They like to attach to people. They can believe in those people, but they don't believe in themselves because they're so devalued. And so they don't want to be the man. They want to just find and support someone, because they could see the future easier for other people than themselves because they're not good enough yet. And so they could support this person and then get used and discarded for it, never really feeling appreciated or valued. A life of martyrdom. That's, the cost of idealizing and a subjective ego based reality. And it's a pattern. And if you're going to tell me that you don't think you're pathological, but you have a pattern that could be described, and I don't even know you, yeah, it's a pattern. You see, what you don't know is that subconscious is you have developed the architecture of an idealized individual that's a confabulation of all these memories, mainly future memories that come together with memories that form this perfect person. And you use that to offset things and suspend doubts. And so the moment you get triggered by something that might look bad, this idealized image of this person makes you go, oh, never mind. Oh, no, you brush off things because you compare the perfect person that you put into the future with the reality of what's showing up. And you trust the idealization because the idealization is the emotional path of least resistance. And see, you'd actually take a not good enough trigger over the abandonment one because the fight or flight system's hierarchical, meaning that it has a proportional assessment of risk. Abandonment's the biggest risk because it causes subjective reality implosion, where the future that you create to generate hope to escape this hell that constitutes your entire lifetime, you need the future. And when the future falls apart, that's when you get heartbroken and feel betrayed and deceived. But you're the deceiver. The voice in your head is the architect of your personal hell because it's interpreting everything. And that's the reality. And so the future you're living into is the someday, your goals, your healing journey. Everybody celebrates your success and you're, valued and loved and successful. But you have to throw it out there in the future because you're not there yet. So you need time to fix yourself because you wouldn't do it based on the reality of today. So you have to stretch it out to give yourself the fantasy illusion that you're going to be able to resolve all your problems so you can get there. So that's the ego's world. That's the story of the sheep. The sheep, that's the martyr, the victim. The sheep is the blind. The sheep is the people pleaser. The people pleaser turns their back on people, though, because the people pleaser's only interested in validation. The people pleaser wants to believe they're good, and they are, but you see, the people pleasers also don't want responsibility. The decision making apparatus of the people pleasers conflict avoidance. And so they don't say yes out of the kindness of their heart, they say yes out of the avoidance of guilt or conflict. And then they justify it. But see, if there's no threat to the people pleaser, then it won't do that. It'll just say, no, thank you. So that's the ego. And then you'd have to learn how to let it go. And I gave you some tips here earlier, but we can do that another time.